And I'm very excited for this this third and final panel that we have. We've got a great set of speakers lined up. We have Joseph Nguyen, the CEO and co-founder of VKey speaking. We have Paul Hadjy, the CEO and co-founder of Horangi Cybersecurity. And we have Nguyen Schindler, the program head of ICE71 in Singapore. So I'm very excited to introduce them. If you just give me a couple of moments, I will prepare our speaker videos. Give me one moment, please. All right. We've got Joseph. We've got Linda. We've got Add Spotlight. We've got Paul. And I would like to introduce our moderator for this final session. I'm sure all of you are very sick and tired of hearing my voice. So I'm very excited to introduce Leesa. She is a partner at R3I Ventures, and she will be moderating this panel. For this final, there we go, and we've added Leesa. For this final session, guys, for everyone here in our audience, a huge part of cyber awareness is our startup ecosystem. By having and promoting and supporting cybersecurity startups, I'm a firm believer that this helps the cybersecurity ecosystem as a whole. So by having people on this final panel who have started and founded cybersecurity companies in the region, who have helped accelerate, incubate, and really foundationally build cybersecurity companies in the region, and having people on this panel who have invested and mentored and coached cybersecurity startups on this panel. I think you're all going to get a fantastic perspective. So I will step back now, and Leesa, I will pass it over to you. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Theo. Great to be here with you today. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. And welcome to our panelists, Joseph, Paul, and Linda. It's fantastic to have you here with us. So as you know, there's this huge talent gap in the market, more than 3.5 million talents that need to go into the field of cybersecurity, and we're just struggling to find them. You've obviously started your career as cybersecurity practitioners. Maybe I can start with Joseph. Joseph, take us back to the beginning. Walk us through your mindset when you were first thinking about pivoting your career towards entrepreneurship. What questions did you ask yourself? What were you excited about? And what made you nervous?
Yeah, I guess I always had an entrepreneurship bug ever since I was in university. I did have the privilege of going to Silicon Valley for my undergraduate and master's degree studies. So I was there for 4 years, and seeing the beginnings of Google, hearing from other startup founders, even in classes, and just feeling, wow, I know I had to go back to Singapore, I had to serve the government, I was on a scholarship, and I had to go back for 8 years. But even throughout those 8 years, I'm like, learning fantastic stuff in the government, but always feeling like, okay, I want to go out and do something, reading all the startup blogs, the VC blogs. So I guess when the opportunity came about, I had a couple of co-founders who approached me and said, hey, there's this fantastic business opportunity. We just need a technology that can solve this problem of the lack of security on mobile phones. If you can find a way to solve this, we can grow this into a business. So I'm like, oh wow, we kind of have all the pieces in place. Yeah. So I knew it was a big risk. Everybody around me was like, wow, Joseph, you're so brave for deciding to do this. But I knew it was kind of now or never, and this was the best chance I could get.
Excellent. And Paul, how about you? Where did you start out, and what was your biggest, I guess, roadblocks in your mind as to whether or not this is really going to be a thing for you?
Yeah, similar to Joseph, I've kind of always had the bug myself. So even when I was in college, I started like a small company then, and then after college, got an opportunity to work for Palantir back in the U.S. And got to see it grow from when I started roughly 60 people to I think over 3,000 now, and they just IPO'd a couple weeks ago. So got to see kind of the growth aspect and how hard it would actually be to run a business at scale. Yeah, and then kind of was thinking about that through Palantir, joined Grab, and kind of got the idea while I was at Grab, and really took the opportunity to kind of build the company. I think one of the main reasons was timing. I think for me, I was I think 29 years old at the time. Was single. and had some good earning years behind me. So I had some savings as well, which I think is really important. And decided to take the jump before building a family, and saw that as an opportunity, and went with it. I think I was also in the right place in the right time, and being in Singapore back in I think 2015, 2016. Not many security companies back then, outside of course Joseph. Took that opportunity to build Horangi and focus on the cloud security problem.
Fantastic. And Linda, great to meet another woman in cyber. There's so few of us, so it's great to meet you here today. Tell me, how did your career in the industry carve out?
Well, for me, it's very different than Joseph and Paul, I have to say. So I've always been kind of around and helping and enabling entrepreneurs, growing, being born and raised in Silicon Valley, coming from a long line of entrepreneurs and small business owners, and then going into law. So I'm actually a recovering attorney. I see that the two aspects that are very similar to law and cybersecurity is one, like law, cybersecurity pretty much touches everybody right now. Yeah. And number two, unfortunately, also like law, people don't think about it until it's too late. And so, we're here at ICE71, we're, an incubator and accelerator, and we're trying to help the cybersecurity startups really grow and scale in the region. And so I think it's like along the same line of, just like being there and helping to enable and to help them grow and scale.
I think that one thing that came out of this is no one really started out their careers with I'm going to be in cybersecurity, right? We ended up there, but we didn't start out there. And I think that's really interesting when we think about training that next generation of cybersecurity professionals. Where did you get your background from, Joseph, in order to move into this space? And what do you think we do well in training of cybersecurity specialists versus not?
Yeah, so I guess I think what they'll call a Xennial, right? I kind of grew up on, assembly language and C programming and computer internals, booting out from floppy disks and all that. So I kind of have always understood the nuts and bolts of how computers work. I didn't actually study computer science or assembly per se for my undergraduate. I did do computer engineering, so more digital design, some, computer internals and stuff like that. Yeah. But, it was around the time of the dot-com boom in Silicon Valley. And, just before graduation, I registered my own domain name. I started to host my own website. And I was poking around and realized, wow, this thing is really not secure. I could do this, I could do that. So I emailed the, virtual hosting administrator. Oh yeah, thank you, and so on. That was kind of my first foray into it, right? But actually, my first career was in cybersecurity. It was the very early days of cybersecurity. Nobody called it cybersecurity then. You either called it computer security or IT security and so on. Yeah. But we're all looking at vulnerabilities and malwares and the internet worms and stuff like that. But one thing I did remember was it was practically impossible to find anybody with a background in cybersecurity, right? So what we really did was we found people with very strong technical backgrounds, very strong programming, database, networking, operating system internals, OS administration. Yeah. I did spend the greater part of my career, almost 10 years in CSIT, in the Ministry of Defense in Singapore. I think most people in the cybersecurity field in Singapore would know that. If you've ever had to take the entrance cybersecurity test in CSIT, I will claim credit for that. It ended up being this 2.5-hour monstrosity. We had a 300-question test bank, all MCQ, all automated. I did a whole multivariate analysis of which questions were the best predictors, easy, medium, difficult questions. If you could even get 30 or 40% of the test, you were probably going to get into the organization. Almost nobody ever passed the test. If you pass the test, somehow you're an expert in like 10 different cybersecurity and IT domains. But yeah, that's kind of what we tried to do. Of course, today, it's impossible, right? You can't find somebody with expertise in AI security or, biometrics or network security or vulnerabilities and exploitation and threat intelligence and all that kind of stuff. So I think today what we also try to do is we try to fuse people of different expertise in. So you do need to hire people with kind of different backgrounds, but you also need to hire different types of architects to try to pull things together. And it's not an easy job. I still remember when we first started a company and my first investor asked some of my co-founders, how are you going to bridge this gap between your rocket scientists and the rest of the engineers? And the rocket scientist, unfortunately, was me, right? Talking all this gibberish that the normal engineer wouldn't understand. So that's something that we've had to learn over the past 9-10 years.
Yeah, and Paul, I guess you would agree it's not only about the people on your team, but it's also about the people that you're selling to and working with in industry. Where do you see the biggest gaps as you're going out into the market in terms of knowledge and skills? And how do you think that can be addressed as cybersecurity companies working into industry in order to build that knowledge and awareness?
Yeah, I think we work in two spaces. So we work a lot with the technology companies as well as more of the enterprise financial institutions, and I think they both address security in a different way. I think where the technology companies struggle, I think thinking is more around like the cloud stuff. So a lot of them understand cloud pretty well. But I think the security challenges in the cloud, like, well, I wouldn't say all of them, but most of them are kind of like new to it. And generally, they do a lot in terms of their process, but they aren't investing in products to help them secure their infrastructure. So I think that's a challenge for us. And a lot of people like know how to buy services, for example. So Horangi does products and services, but so a lot of our customers really engage us initially for the services, but for the long term, of course, like what helps keep those companies secure and from a monitoring and sort of compliance and security perspective is actually the product piece. So I think the knowledge around buying services because of the regulation that's in place from the government here is quite high, actually. So they understand why they need cybersecurity services to do the things like penetration tests or have an IR retainer and those types of things. But when it comes to buying products, I think less so. So there's a bit of education there in terms of why a product is important. And then with the financial institutions, I would say a majority of them are pretty well versed on security challenges. Where they are less so is in the cloud as well. Because essentially in majority of those cases, they've only transitioned a part of their business to the cloud, and it's generally not the most important part either. So it's less of a focus for them. And as they have more of their developers kind of like working in that environment, potentially making misconfiguration changes in the cloud, they start to be aware of that, and that's kind of like where we help them. But yeah, definitely the cloud security challenge and what's different about it, I think, is sometimes challenge for the larger institutions as well, because they're transitioning from that on-prem world into the cloud environment. I would say that's gotten a lot better over the past 4 to 5 years. One, because of the cloud service providers are doing a lot to sort of educate them, and two, just like experience like over time is helping quite a bit. So I think it's changing, but definitely back like when we first started the company, that was a major issue for us.
Very interesting. So Joseph's given us a great internal perspective around that skill gap analysis and competency building. And Paul, you've given us an outstanding kind of representation of some of the hurdles that you're facing, both in educating and accessing the market. Linda, you spend a great deal of your effort and time cultivating our talents and know-how in the ecosystem. What do you see as the core drivers currently in building cybersecurity capacity in Singapore?
Well, I mean, like what we're seeing on the ground for our startups are that they're seeing like everyone's seeing, right? The increase in cloud, increase in AI. The startups are also seeing an increase in the fact that the demand drivers, the CISOs, they don't want to see so many alerts on, they don't want to buy 100 solutions and get 100 alerts. So how do you really consolidate that and make it usable? And so our startups are really going out there and tackling these issues, which, COVID-19 didn't, initiate these issues, but they definitely sped it up for a lot of the companies. And therefore our startups are going out there and they're trying to tackle these issues, trying to work with the corporates and in a way that right now, since it's, very urgent, that they want to be able to work with the corporates and be able to customize solutions for them, rather than going to like a bigger company and that might, take more time and the solution might not be as customized. Our startups are trying to go out there and saying, hey, look, we have these solutions for you. We can work with you. We can co-create this for you and make it work for you.
Now, Singapore, as you know, have been a little laggard in the cybersecurity adoption space. Time to detection was just over 300 days in region as of last year, and it's not getting any better, unfortunately. And our cyber criminals have not only professionalized, but they've also scaled their entities, and we're seeing massive increases on the back of COVID-19. Joseph, if you think about someone coming into this area of career opportunity, where would you recommend they focus their time and attention given the great market potential here?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to be done actually, to be frank, across all the areas. For example, I used to think, network security, that was it did, right? With all these great networking companies, firewall companies. I think even as recently as 5 years ago, I still see new startups coming out with new stuff around network security. So it's like, wow, you mean this is still a live area? I would have thought this was all done and dusted 20 years ago or 15 years ago at least, right?
Yeah.
But we actually continue to see a lot of innovation across the board, right? So don't get me wrong. Of course, if you're looking for funding, investors love AI, machine learning, analytics. There are a few hot areas for sure that are definitely not as well covered as some of the more mature areas, I would say, right?
Yeah.
But I always do tell people, in Singapore, we love our food, right? I joke, if you are the best noodles in Singapore, you will still make $1 million, right? But if you're going to be everybody else, don't expect to make a lot of money, right? But it's more important to be that best noodle seller than, just to sell pasta because it's popular, right? If you sell mediocre pasta, you're not going to make any money, right?
Yeah.
So I always feel, I know it's cliche and some people say, don't say that, but I do feel very strongly, follow your passion. If you are passionate about an area, and of course, importantly, if you have a strong background in a particular set of areas, go into that, right? To be frank, VKey kind of grew out of my 3 kind of competencies, if you will. I did study computer architecture in Stanford. I did do cybersecurity when I was in MINDEF. And I happened to also lead the cryptography lab for a short while as well. So our core technology really fuses those 3, right? So virtual machine, combining, a cybersecurity protection mechanism in order to build a secure cryptographic module purely in software, right? Nobody else could have come up with that idea, unfortunately. And if I had tried to do something different, just because I thought, I should do this because it's the hot area that an investor will give me money for it, and that probably wouldn't have flown and wouldn't have been successful.
Fantastic.
So, look to your own strengths and build based on those.
Fantastic. Excellent. And really dominating the niche, right? As opposed to addressing the market. Tell me, Paul, if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently career-wise?
Yeah. Oh, career-wise. Career-wise, that's a difficult one. I think generally for me, I really like video games, and actually how I got into cybersecurity was video games, because like myself and the CTO are actually cousins, so we've known each other our whole lives really. And like how we got into cybersecurity was like we would like write bots. Well, actually he would write the bots. I would test them for video games on like we used to play Diablo 2 a lot back in the early 2000s, and we'd like write a bot that essentially allowed it to like play while we were at school. And that's kind of how we got into it. So video games I think would be the passion that I would focus on. And I think like generally in terms of career advice, I agree with Joseph as well. Like, I mean, in my background, actually, before I worked at Palantir, I was actually with the government doing cybersecurity stuff as well. And I think like that sort of focus and understanding of the space, especially in cybersecurity or really any field where you need subject matter expertise to build a company, I feel like is essential because, one of the biggest things in terms of raising money, getting customers is credibility. And all of those things, especially in security, like kind of need to be in place. You can't just start well, I'm sure you can, but it's much more difficult to start a security company straight out of college without the background in the space or even having working experience. I think the working experience part is really important because it helps you understand the buying process and things like that are going to be essential when you build a company.
Fantastic. So follow your passion from Joseph and earn your stripes from Paul. Over to you, Linda. You're out there cultivating this ecosystem and really generating some level of knowledge sharing. Where do you see the real pivot points for Singapore in playing a role in cybersecurity in the region? What are the core competencies that need to be developed in your opinion?
Well, look, I mean, first let's look at Singapore, right? I mean, it has so much to offer for us, someone who wants to start a cybersecurity company here. First, it's the gateway to Southeast Asia, right? So we all know the Asia Pacific has seen the highest growth of billion-dollar startups, and Southeast Asia is going to be the 4th largest economy in the world. So Singapore can really be that landing pad and launch pad into the region. And obviously the strong support for innovation by government, by all the corporates here, all the initiatives for startups by CSA, by MAS, by Enterprise Singapore. And then from there, you also have the pipeline, right? The universities are involved in this. At NUS, they are working with the Startup SG program, and they have their NUS Venture Builder program. So they're trying to encourage anyone who's interested in starting a startup to come join this program, 3 months. And in Singapore style, not only do you not pay, but they pay you stipend, you know, like to really experiment and to try to get, you know, like maybe into a different field. And so you see like all of this happening, the industry connections and all of this happening. And so the environment is ripe for a company to be there. Now on the ground, what the startups have told me though, is some of the challenges are, you know, talent resource, for example.
Yes.
Although here you have, I mean, it's a positive, very highly educated, skilled worker. So great place for corporates to have their regional headquarters, for example, and therefore offering lots of opportunities. However, because it's then so competitive, you know, it's so hard to get, you know, that talent. And so that's something that I think we're also trying to help build that pipeline for. So one of our programs is ICE71 Inspire. And so we really want to inspire that pipeline of future, either aspiring entrepreneurs or someone who just wants to potentially join a startup, right? To really open the doors for them to be able to do that. Because like I said, we see that as a huge gap that we can help with.
Fantastic. Now, look, there's been a lot of talk at this current moment in time post-COVID that while the opportunities are huge, they're only available for the locals. Tell me, how do you see that being addressed as this rolls out, Linda? Are you seeing opportunities for foreign companies to land here and access those grants and those opportunities, or is it only a domestic one?
Well, I think you're correct. I think a lot of the grants are for citizens and permanent residents, but I think there are a lot of opportunities to tap into government resources. I mean, even if it's not grants, there's so much support here to really foster that, you know, supercharged journey for a startup. And so I think there's just so much, you know, going on here that it can really help. Like, for example, our program, we take startups from all over the world, not just Singaporean startups. Of course, you know, we're here to help foster that cybersecurity ecosystem within the local economy. But by doing that, we also bring in all the startups from all around the world, you know, because as they land here and they grow and scale here, then they build here, they hire here, they bring their knowledge to Singapore and to the region. So I think, you know, that's really important and a real benefit for a company that wants to be here.
And let's talk cash, guys, because at the end of the day, that's what many people in Singapore are focused on. I once did a session in my class at SMU. Which C are you most concerned about? Cash, children, cars, chocolate, Cabernet Merlot? What was your calling? And every person had put cash as number one. So, you know, it's a challenge in a startup ecosystem when no one values your equity in the same way as they do everywhere else in the world. Joseph, how are you overcoming that challenge of cash versus equity as incentives for future workers?
Yeah, I think we have actually had an employee stock options plan from very early on. So I think we have always made a point to, you know, identify and reward our top performers who we do want to communicate that they are valuable to the company, and of course encourage them to contribute, do their best, and stay on with us in the longer term as well. You are absolutely correct though. I think, you know, Singapore is a relatively new startup ecosystem. We have been rising very rapidly, of course, in the startup rankings. So that's fantastic news. It's very different today, I must say, compared to 10 years ago when we first started. So, you know, when ICE71 first approached me, oh yes, we have to do this, happy to come on board and support this and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, you're absolutely correct. I think the employees don't see, you know, that kind of, you know, past exits, right? In Silicon Valley, it's very clear, right? Everybody's like, I want stock options, right? Don't forget about salary. Don't tell me about salary. Yeah, just give me something I'll be comfortable with. But how many stock options I'm going to get? How many percentage is that, etc., right? Here you give the stock options, they don't even know what it means, right? They don't even ask, you know, what's the value, what's the anything about it, because they just don't even understand what to ask. We kind of have to guide them through that. So we do think it is still important to give it, of course, but it needs to be combined with a whole host of other mechanisms. I have made a point to try to make sure that we do pay fairly as well. I must say that in the early years, we probably underpaid. Sorry, early employees.
All right, you're a startup and you don't have the choice.
And we really scraped through. I mean, even I took a big pay cut, right, from my government job previously. So like, oh wow, okay, seeing my savings deplete. So yes, savings before you start a startup, always very important, right? But we try to do everything. We give a good working environment, making sure it's a positive environment, putting in place a good culture is critical as well. And I think touching on culture in particular, I've found that the people who are really motivated are the ones who really do believe in the mission, the vision of the company, really do believe that there's something that can be done that's exciting and it's worth investing their own time with. I do have very senior people who join me from organizations that, to be frank, they were doing very well, driving big cars, big houses, and they took big pay cuts, and their pay cuts were bigger than my pay cuts. But they joined us because they really do believe that they could do something. So I think it really is important for startups to know and to drive that mission, right? Because in the end, that's what really, I think, keeps everybody together. I mean, when you're struggling, trying to close the deal, trying to figure out how you manage difficult situations, trying to apologize to a customer who you disappointed, or trying to make sure a project launches on time. These are the things that keep you together in difficult moments.
Fantastic. And look, Paul, there's been a conditioning of this market that every 2 years people jump ship because they're going to get 10% from the competitor, right? How are you challenging that status quo and really retaining your people as you build out the company?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. And I mean, it's challenging. Like, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say we're perfect at it either. I think, 2 years is in startup world, I think is actually like a good amount of time to keep someone. If you can get 2 years for everyone, that's decent. 3 is like great. And 4 is like unheard of. So I think, I mean, that's kind of just the way it is. And at some level you can do whatever you can to mitigate. But if you have really good people like us, you will become a target eventually, and headhunters will notice, and then of course come after you and your people, right? And it's just like part of growing a company, I think. But what we do is like a ESOP, as Joseph mentioned, and it's a big part of what we believe is important for people that join the company. We give it to everyone. So I think that's a really big part of it. We do face the same challenges in terms of explaining that into why it's potentially valuable. Luckily, I am a walking example of that, like having worked at Palantir for 7 years and just recently got to experience a bit myself. So I did talk about that to the company and kind of explain my path and working at Palantir through those times, and was decently open with how the outcome ended for me. So I think it gives them an idea of that piece. Now, of course, as Joseph mentioned as well, there's less examples of that here, which factual examples of that is really important. We also take compensation very seriously. So we invest a lot in buying the data. So we understand what market salaries are. We have a fully fledged leveling system. So we basically level everyone from an individual contributor or a manager scale, understand what level their experience puts them at, what level we put them at, and then have salary ranges for those different levels. And I think doing that is very useful because it helps you understand what market is actually versus what people are saying it is, because oftentimes those two things are different as well. So we find that very helpful. It's not perfect though. We still lose people. Sometimes some big US tech company will come in here and bump someone's salary much more than 10%, which has happened a couple of times. But again, I look at that in the long term as a kind of flattering that the big US tech company would come in and offer someone from our team, 50% more, because that means that we've been garnering good people that can go work at those big companies and get those jobs. So I think it's always going to be a challenge. We also invest in training, so we give everyone a training budget. It's quite generous as well because we do services, so the certifications that our people get is important for our customer base. So we give a very $6,000 a year in terms of training support that they get. So that's really important in terms of leveling them up. which is we try to be competitive around that. We also give like insurance and other things that help as well, especially in the startup space, because it's not as common as it would be if you're working for a traditional company. So yeah, we do all that, but we still lose people. So like I don't know that there's a solution. It's just you got to do whatever you can to mitigate it, right? It's like, you know, making changes, like making things interesting, doing new projects, all these things combined will help, but it's not going to solve the problem. And I think ultimately as a founder, you have to accept that. And like, I spent the early years of running the company getting like quite upset every time someone would leave, but ultimately kind of figured, I'm sure Joseph went through this as well. But finally, I've kind of come to the conclusions like people leave, I got to be okay with it. And like I can't be like super attached to people, but you know, it's still a little bit, hurts a little bit, I think, yeah, when they leave.
I guess the concept of alumni around the world is extremely advantageous, right? And you see McKinsey and BCG and the like really exploit the opportunity of having their alumni, people who've left the company, stay connected to the company and refer people into your company because they once worked there, they know and trust the company, and they're confident that they can deliver to their customers. So there's opportunities, of course, Paul, after people leave the company to continue to be your ambassadors in the field, as long as that exit is handled very well. And I guess, Linda, as you're prepping your companies in order to scale and in order to take our capital, often people have to edit the team, right? What got you there is not going to get you to the next phase. What do you see as the biggest hurdles that startup entrepreneurs face when editing the team and really building themselves out for the next phase?
Yeah, so I mean, first I want to go back to what Paul said. I mean, I guess it's better to train them up and lose them than like no one wants them, right? Like everyone wants them is good, no one wants them is bad, right? So yeah. But anyways, going back to your question, yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is so you have these founding teams, right? And they were so excited, they had this idea, they got started, they got their seed funding, and then all of a sudden, you know, the momentum picks up and they're scaling, and it's hard to make that transition. I think a lot of the founders who may have been in the right position to start the company may not be in the right role for the company when they scale. And so I think what's really helpful is to get outside perspective, right? I think it's really hard a lot of times when I see our startups, they talk, and internally, if your co-founder says it to you, potentially, you're like, you know, it doesn't resonate as much as when we broaden the network and the community and we say, hey, we bring in these mentors, right? Someone who's, you know, a neutral third party and who's saying, you know, where are you at? Where would you like to go and how can I help? So when they sit down with our mentors and people in our community and they're able to bounce off ideas and get different perspectives, I think that's really helpful for them to see where they need to go, what they need to do to get to the next level.
And maybe just to share, as a VC operating in the region, investing in cybersecurity companies, and we've got a house of deep tech focused specifically on cybersecurity in Luxembourg. We actually don't invest in anyone in terms of bringing them on board our company unless they've done a tool called Fingerprint for Success, which looks at 46 intrinsic motivators of that individual. And then we look at them in the context of the team, right? And we both curate and coach our team according to those metrics. But then whenever we invest in a company, because we're founders first and we're always there to build, we're not coming unless we're building, we're not coming unless we're leading. And we're actually mapping our skills and competencies as a VC to their skills and competencies as a company to see how together we're going to be able to move forward for that next stage of growth. And many VCs across the world use similar tools, probably nothing as good as Fingerprint for Success. But I wonder, Joseph, what have you used in your company as an analytics tool to get beyond the subjectivity of human relationships and emotion in order to better curate and craft your team for growth?
Yeah, it's funny. So VQ was selected to be on the Enterprise Singapore Scale Up program. Just funny. Just last week we were in the consultant's office, and there was obviously various team building exercises and all that. But yeah, as part of that, of course, there was a kind of a self-assessment personality test that was done. Of course, I've done a whole bunch of them in my own career before. But yeah, it was interesting to see in that particular instrument that was used, you know, amongst myself and my 3 other CXOs were there, all 4 of us essentially scored the highest on 4 different personalities in that type. So, my CFO was kind of, the numbers guy, essentially, right? And then, all of us had different styles in terms of how we chose to work and influence other people. I do, my wife is a trained psychologist. She does MBTI and other stuff. I think there are a lot of instruments out there that you can use.
Yeah.
Of course, some swear by, Strength Finder and other stuff. But yeah, I guess just different teams will end up using different instruments, I guess.
And do you use them in your company today beyond the exercise that you did in that startup ecosystem?
No, actually, we don't right now. To be frank, I took over as CEO about 3 years ago. So Linda was, I didn't start out as being the CEO. I was the CTO initially. But now that we're about nine years plus, coming to 10 years, we kind of had a transition in leadership. And with that, also I brought on my CXO team with me. And I think over the past few years, we have been putting in place a lot more processes around performance management and team management.
Yeah.
So I guess I came from the civil service in Singapore, and I did see a lot of instruments being used. But I always believe that, from my whole history, seeing a whole bunch of different instruments, it's actually how you use them around the objectives that you want for your team. So we do things like management retreats, for example. We do team building exercises. We did implement 360 rankings last year. Initial, I would say, not quite up to my standard yet. We're going to go into it in a much bigger way this year. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that we have been putting into place over the past few years. But yeah, to be frank, a lot of these instruments do cost money as well. So I'm still a bit of a penny pincher. Have to be in a startup.
You should check out Fingerprint for Success. It's free.
Okay, great. That's good to know. I will definitely take a look at that then. Biggest criteria is how much does it cost? Oh, okay.
Yeah, free works, right? So how about you, Paul? Obviously, there's a ton of tools out there. How do you mix that analytics opportunity with the human connectivity and analysis that you would do?
Yeah, I think for us, we use some tools around this specifically. So I think for incoming people, we use a piece of software called Lever, which helps us do a couple of things. So one, when everyone applies for a job, we ask questions prior. Which of course, the resume is one way to filter, but also we ask questions. I mean, the easiest filter is people don't fill out the questions, and then that's a simple filter. But some people put a lot of thought and I think work into the simple 3 questions that we ask when they submit their resume, and it tells you a bit about that person. Maybe their resume doesn't tell you, which I think is important for us and important for us to identify talent and also gauge interest as well, right? The thing we do, I think, for existing employees and people who have gotten hired in the companies, we use 2 pieces of software. One is called Bamboo HR, which essentially allows us to do things like ENPS survey. ENPS isn't my favorite because I feel like it's pretty hit or miss sometimes, because you're basically just asking a question once, would you refer someone to work at Horangi? And then you get a variety of answers with comments. But now we have also implemented another software tool called Small Improvements, which essentially helps with 360 feedback, as well as other things like annual reviews. We do biannual reviews, as well as other information. You can give feedback to anyone in the business. That's it's not actually anonymous, but you can give the feedback to anyone in the business at any time, positive or negative, as well. Which is very cool and something that we found is important. It also it's integrated with Slack, so you can see every time someone gets a positive shout out that goes into our general channel. So I find that useful. And I think those things combined together kind of give people some level of career development in terms of they know what they need work on, they know what they're good at, and subsequently kind of have a feeling they have input into what's happening within the business and the culture of the company. Plenty of other things that we can be doing, but that's where we've gotten to it. You're almost 5 now of the business.
Fantastic. That's a lot of outstanding initiatives and certainly allows you to temperature check the business as you're growing it.
Yeah.
Great. And how about you, Linda? As you're seeing those early teams built out. What do you think is the current approach to recruitment in the market, and how do you think it could be improved?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say a lot of the startups I know, they have a network and they are with someone that they knew from before. You know, it's not someone who's unfamiliar with them, and so I think that familiarity is good and bad. I've seen, and you know, so I think that is one way. And I think, like I said before, a lot of the startups then said once they're ready to grow and scale, they've found it difficult to get the talent and the resources that they need to continue growing. So again, I think that if we can help build that talent pipeline here, which is something we're working on with CSA, with IMDA, the government agencies here, and how to really facilitate that to grow the, you know, the community, and really allow for people to get a chance to get into something that maybe they didn't think was possible, and to enable that, as well as to try to help you know, people who are already in the ecosystem to connect with relevant parties and stakeholders, and to upskill in that way.
Excellent. I mean, they're fantastic initiatives. Having the government on board and having that support and being part of that dialogue is so important, that voice of industry. We've got a poll up here: founding a cyber startup in Singapore, what do you think is the most important part of entrepreneurship in your opinion? Is it hiring? Is it fundraising? Is it product development? Or is it sales? I invite you, the audience, to participate in our poll. And I'm going to throw that over to Joseph today. What do you think is the most important part of entrepreneurship? Is it hiring? Is it fundraising? Is it product development? Or is it sales?
So I must admit that as a technologist, you know, really focusing on the nuts and bolts of the cybersecurity technology that I was building, I was extremely focused on, you know, the engineering and the technology and the security effectiveness of, you know, the technology and the solution that we're building. And initially for mobile devices, iOS and Android. You know, over the years, I think one thing that I've realized that, you know, we don't do as well in Asia and in Singapore compared to, I think, many startups overseas is, I guess, the focus more on this broader area of product management and product marketing. So I still remember, right? Maybe it was 3 years into VKey. I was in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, visiting a customer there. And on the way to the airport, the partner gave me a lift, and I was just asking him, so, you know, what do you think, you know, we need to do better? They said, oh no, your product's fine, you know, fantastic, customer's happy, everything's going well. But I think you guys need to do better in marketing yourself. And you know what really struck me was, you know, I still remember visiting some startups in the Valley, right? And it was like 3 people. You had the CEO, you had a VP of engineering, maybe not even a CTO necessarily, and you had a product marketing person, right? It's like, wow, you know, that's one of your first hires, that's your founding team. So I think product management and product marketing is actually quite critical to startups. I do make an effort to tell the young startups not to neglect that. I think coming from a very technical environment, coming from perhaps a more quiet Asian culture, we tend to not, you know, be very profuse about talking about our solutions or wanting to say how good we are. But sometimes when you're trying to build a startup, you have to do that, right? And you have to figure out what message sticks with the market. You know, of course, understanding what features, pricing, all that kind of stuff, not just the marketing aspects. But so I would say essentially product management.
Excellent. Yeah, and how about you, Paul? So product management on Joseph's side, from the technologist perspective, what have you found to be the most important part of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, I made the same mistake and didn't hire a product manager early enough. So I agree that is a big part of it. But I think actually, like, hiring and fundraising to me are actually sales. So I would say like sales, and even includes product marketing as well, because like, you have to, in sales, you kind of have to know what to say to get people to buy your product. So I think it's really like the sales piece is really important. And I think, you know, there's multiple ways that you can like screw up a company, I guess. You know, I think one of those is product management. The other one is sales, is not hiring sales or not like doing sales well early enough. And it definitely includes hiring and fundraising as well, because like fundraising, you're definitely selling yourself some level, as you mentioned. You're also selling the company and the idea. And if you aren't super passionate about it, which you like have to be in that case, but also don't have any sales experience in turning that into a deal, then not helpful. And hiring as well, right? You got to convince those people that your idea is the best one and why they should come work for your company, and like what is the long-term outlook of the business, what is your plan. What are they going to be doing? Like, what is the growth path? Why is this equity, this piece of paper valuable in 10 years from now, 5 years from now, hopefully? Yeah, so I think like all that included, but I definitely made the same mistake with product management, and definitely next time, if I ever start a company again, like one of the first hires I'll make is a product manager as well.
Fantastic, really insightful. And as a VC, it's really interesting, right? Because we do all of these scorecards in the very early days, very much focused on a checklist method or a scorecard method, looking at all those qualitative aspects of the team. And while product marketing is important, we figure if we've got the right team, we can always pivot, right? So it's interesting to see who places the most emphasis on what. How about you, Linda? What do you think is the most important asset in entrepreneurship?
I was going to say, I agree with Paul. I think sales is embedded in every single, one of the priorities for a startup. I think a startup is small, they're early days. Every single person in your startup needs to be able to sell, from obviously the founder needs to be the loudest and most passionate evangelist. But I think every single person needs to be able to sell whatever it is, whether it'd be like, what problem are you trying to solve? How many times, like still, we see companies, they still are having a hard time articulating it and still want to sell a solution rather than solving a problem, like they want to just, they know that technically this is a great solution that they have, but they're not out there, really trying to listen to the customer and how do you change your pitch and your approach to each customer.
Yeah, very important insights. And if only I could go back to our first cybersecurity startup and reflect on those things, right? How you might have done things differently. Now, it's interesting to see what the panel of audience thought today. If you have a look, product development, 53%, fundraising, 47%, hiring, 41%, and sales, 35%. And, it's never just an observation on the current startup funding ecosystem. I think pre-COVID, if you didn't have any revenue, there are a lot of VCs out there that'd just give you a go, right? They'd carve you a small check, they'd let you have a run and then see where you land and see whether or not you're worth investing more. What we've seen post-COVID, the first 2 quarters post-COVID, there was still a lot of deep tech money around and people were still willing to invest. But now, unless you've got the track record, unless you've got the run rate, people are really holding back on executing checks to people without revenue. So this is a really interesting climate at the moment on the fundraising side. And with that, I guess I want to open it out to you, Joseph and Paul. Fundraising is probably the hardest thing you ever have to do and the most time consuming we appreciate. What do you think has been the one thing that's got you over the line, taking into consideration the talent at your table when pitching to investors?
Yeah, so I guess we are in a bit of a unique situation now. As I mentioned, we are about 9 years plus now.
Yeah.
And I guess as an enterprise software company in a broader sense, and with where we are right now, we actually have turned profitable end of last year and the first couple of quarters of this year as well. So full year, we will be profitable as well.
Yeah.
And what that does mean is that for us, actually fundraising now is a lower priority. Not that we don't think we need to raise funds at all, because there are still, especially newer initiatives that we're looking at, newer business lines, and also we are trying to figure out how fast we want to expand. This year, for example, 3/4 of our new deals came from outside of Singapore. So of course, while we still have a lot of customers in Singapore, we are really focusing on our overseas expansions now. And of course, overseas expansions requires overseas sales and pre-sales, and that is always going to be a bit of an investment in the first few months before you close your first deal. So some fundraising would be helpful there. But you're absolutely correct. I think the issue is that we do think that fundraising is pretty time consuming, and we're trying not to spend too much time in it. But I think having a good team in place. So of course, Leesa, team is critical, right?
Yeah.
I think in the past few years, I've really made an effort to put a very strong CXO team around myself. I guess I'm the kind of person who really doesn't do well micromanaging. I really do need people around me that I know can do their jobs and that we can work together from a strategic perspective. Not just me calling them every day, have you done this? Can you do that? Can you do that? And I was like, oh, I'll just go crazy, right? So kind of knowing that you're people who can take care of your sales, take care of your finance, not just, of course, your books, but also projections and analytics, taking care of course, the product development, product management, I think is critical because, even when you come to a pitch deck, you need to present all of that, right? And your investors are going to want to know that you know what you're doing, from a sales perspective, from a cash flow perspective, from a product management perspective. You kind of need all those pieces in. And if you're just raising your seed funding or Series A funding, you can kind of wing it as a co-founder. At most, the VC will ask you, so how do you derive those numbers again? What were your assumptions? Are you sure you can get 2% of the market? The usual kind of questions you see in the early pitch decks. But once it comes to the later rounds of funding, you can't really get away with that anymore, right? Investors do expect a lot more. And seeing that traction that needs to be qualified with numbers as well. And, if for me as a technologist, I wouldn't, I would need someone who would be able to say, okay, how do I analyze this, an Excel guru pulling all the numbers from your Xero or your QuickBooks and then trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean? What's your Salesforce, projections and things like that. So having that strong team, not just in terms of a founding team, but also, your senior management team, and to a large extent, your one downs as well as your team grows is going to be very critical.
Excellent. And I think that's a really important point, right? It's not only about the senior leadership team, it's about those functional teams really being able to execute. And Paul, it's not only about your internal team, right? It's about your external team. Tell us about the external teams that you brought to the table as you grew the company, thinking about your VCs, channel partners, etc.
Yeah. I think for us, the VCs that we have in our business, we have Monk Hill, as well as Profit and Growth now with our Series B. I think both of them have been great in making introductions, I think, which is hugely important for us in getting customers. Having direct access to the CEOs of a lot of the tech companies, as well as large financial institutions around the region is very helpful when you're trying to sell stuff. Because it's generally one of the harder parts is getting in touch with the right person. I also think on that aspect, it's very clear, the direct value add, I think, as well as the government support. In Monk Hill's case, Cody used to work at IMDA, so that was quite helpful for us in terms of getting introductions there. And then I think there's just the emotional support. I feel like no one talks about that much, but it's actually really important.
Yes, huge.
Yeah, running a startup is really, really, really hard. And it's it's a roller coaster of emotions, lots of euphoria, and followed very quickly, usually by fear, and then the fear subsides for a long time, and then euphoria comes back randomly. But
I can relate to that.
So I think no one, not many people talk about it. I think it's being talked about more, but it's really a slog, I think, on your emotional mindset, going through COVID, right, which is a challenge for any business. Luckily, in our case, we just finished fundraising, but still had to make some hard decisions. And I think those types of things really drain on you, and having someone who's been through that before can advise you through these situations, make sure you're not gonna step on any landmines or crash the airplane is very helpful. So I think from that aspect, the VCs are huge in that area. I also any of my senior staff that comes on, have them interview with the VCs, just because ultimately they'll be presenting to the board and need to have confidence, and I want it to be a shared decision. So if that person doesn't work out, we maybe there's something that we can all learn from this, right? What did we not see, or what did we see and just went ahead with anyways, that we won't do that again, and it is a learning experience there. Yeah, and then on the partner side, I think, channel partners is a big part of how we push products. So Amazon is one of our biggest, AWS, and that partnership has been great. Our platform was built on AWS, so that like made the start easy. But then, of course, like as we went through, very big company that's grown a lot in this region over the past 5 years. So navigating that has been an interesting aspect, but overall been super helpful for us and in getting to market, and we're available in their marketplace. And now we're in a place where their salespeople actually get commissioned for selling our product, which is very cool, which is a new thing for us. So partners can be very useful, but my advice there is like 9 times out of 10, it's not going to work out. And you can waste a lot of time on partners. So make sure you choose the right ones, and then you're dropping the ones that don't make sense very quickly, because like you can really waste a ton of time on partners. And in my experience, 1 out of 10 is gonna bear fruit.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, something that we learned very early in the piece is once you've defined your desired customer experience, and you think about that in terms of product, price, access, package, transaction, and support, and then you think about what are the enablers of that customer experience that I've just described? What is it that I need to deliver to enable that customer experience? And then what is it my partners need to deliver to enable that experience? And therefore, what competencies and capabilities and incentives do I need in order to enable that partner to deliver that customer experience? And then finally, what overhead does that put on me as a company? What programs do I need to build in terms of training and development, incentive plans, oversight or regulatory compliance in order to make sure that my channel partner is delivering that customer experience? Those elements in particular are often not factored in, or they're actually not measured as you start that partnership. And I think we're always focused at the beginning around what is our revenue target, what is our return on investment target, and what is the margins that I need here. But too often we forget to consider what is that strategic alignment with our business. And I think that's a real opportunity. On that note, I'd like to put it back to you, Linda. You've seen cybersecurity companies land here and be extremely successful. And you've seen cybersecurity companies land here and crash and burn. What's the difference? What made those guys successful and those guys crash and burn?
As with everything, luck and timing, maybe. It's like the two big factors, right? For example, we had startups that were ready to go. They were like, we're ready to come to Singapore. We're about to launch XYZ. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and it was like, how can you have planned for this? We can't even get into the country to sell, for example. And so, and in that instance, I would say, I think that's why the networks are important. Networks are always important, right? No matter what career, what industry you're in. But as a startup, I think you have to have access to a strong network of not only, like, say, investors, but potential demand drivers and end users, and potential mentors, to get you through, like Paul was saying, like the dips and the highs, like that you can share it with. And so, that's kind of like, what we've seen. In terms of whether or not there was anything specific that caused a team to not do well here, I guess if I had to say something, it would be that, to not anticipate that this region is very diverse, that just because, you tap into Singapore, you automatically get, like you just plug and play in everywhere, everywhere else in the region. That's why it's important to be a part of these networks, to get those people who can help you with your go-to-market strategy here, to get those mentors to give you and make those introductions to the connections in the various countries.
Fantastic. So I've seen that internal perspective around building out the team and why that's important in the growth of the company. We've seen Paul's perspective around how we build out our ecosystem externally to give us that support to get to the next level. And Linda's perspective around what works and what doesn't. I guess now I'd like to throw it back to you as a just final wrap up, Joseph. If you had one word of advice to give to a current graduate of mine from Singapore Management University who is thinking, mom and dad are saying banking and finance, or law, you've got to go and be a lawyer. And they're thinking, no, cybersecurity is it. What's your advice to them? How do they convince their parents?
Well, first and foremost, cybersecurity itself is a fantastic career. You know, you'll be in high demand, you get great pay, really interesting technologies and opportunities to work with. No issues there. But cybersecurity startup, like any startup, think twice, right? Maybe as a fresh graduate, especially. Not to say you can't do it, but I always do believe, especially in enterprise software companies, you know,
Yeah.
I think, as was mentioned earlier, you know, it's good to get experience, good to build that network as well, and good to
Yeah.
understand, you know, what the buying cycle is like, where the pain points really are from a practical perspective before you do it. So, and that's on top of everything else that's difficult with startups, right? So do think twice. And if you do want to do a startup and you're really serious about it, you know, not just try it out for 12 months before you do the real banking job, right? You know, you really have to be prepared. I mean, the first 3 years of VKey were the toughest years in my life, right?
Yeah,
It's gotten a lot
absolutely.
easier. So that's a good thing, but you know, you do have to be prepared for that uphill battle the first few years, especially.
All right, so Paul, I wonder, do you share that same perspective? Should or should recent graduates avoid startups, or should they just jump in the deep end with both feet and swim as fast as they can? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think for me, like it depends on the role a lot. Like I think if you're like an engineer, depending on the size of the startup too, like if it's like a 5-person startup, I wouldn't recommend it for like an engineer.
Yeah.
You know, like I think when it's like more like 70, 80, like I think there's plenty of stuff to learn and they have some experienced individuals that can help you train. But I agree that like some of the structure stuff you learn at a bigger company is going to be really useful when you go to a small one. Because like, I mean, getting from 5 to 80, we make so many mistakes that like if you had worked at a bigger company, like I mean I saw some, but like I'm sure if we had people in each one of those roles, like we would have avoided a lot of mistakes along the way. And having that experience before jumping in, even like 1 to 2 years, I think is valuable. Also, I think generally, like engineering wise, like it's important to have some of the structure and skill sets that's needed. And I think same with cybersecurity expertise as well. I think you can do it, but at some level, it may be good to have like some of those like forward-facing skills from a consultant perspective or from the engineering perspective. Like, yeah, just have the general structure around how an actual engineering process works, especially if you're joining an early stage one, and then you can always go back to it. And it might even be more exciting than after leaving a very structured org.
Very good. All righty. And Linda, over to you. A message and a shout out for all those women in cyber. What's your advice?
I was like, gosh, you know, here's Joseph and Paul discouraging people from getting into cybersecurity entrepreneurship, which is like my bread and butter. No, I mean, to be honest, like, look, cybersecurity startup, the average age of the cybersecurity startup founder is older than most other industries. I don't know how old Joseph and Paul, they look very young to me, but you know, that because of the technical nature of it, the founders tend to be a bit older. However, I see the value in still exploring it and still, you know, testing it. You know, I know an NUS student, she's actually interned for 2 different cybersecurity startups to get that experience and to kind of have a feel of what she needs to kind of prepare herself for this journey, right? So, which I think is great, you know, like she's not saying, I'm going to start one right off the bat. She's actually trying to test it out, see what she's lacking and kind of build up her profile for that. And so I guess my last shout out is you join ICE71, then you can, you know, explore all the entrepreneurship opportunities and meet lots of interesting people.
Fantastic. So obviously life as a cybersecurity entrepreneur in Singapore is exciting. There's a huge amount of growth momentum in the market, and clearly there's a huge amount of opportunity among the ecosystem. So jump in with both feet, join us on the journey. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Theo. Thank you so much. Thanks, panelists, for your time today. We greatly appreciate your perspectives and look forward to continuing to work together.
Thanks, Leesa.
Thanks, Leesa.
Leesa, Paul, Linda, Joseph, a fantastic panel discussion. I'm sitting here in my chair as a cybersecurity founder, having learned a ton from you guys. You scared me a little bit at the end there, but absolutely learned a ton. I want to just take a moment here because we have concluded our event here in just a minute, but I just want to thank all of our speakers from today for such an incredible job sharing their experiences, best practices. The transparency we had throughout the past 2.5 hours was incredible. I want to thank our audience. Just looking here at the attendees, we have the majority have hung on the full 2.5 hours. So thank you to all of you for setting the time aside in your day. I know you're all very busy, so I'm very grateful for that. I want to thank our event partner, ICE71. They played a big role in helping us pull off this event today. So Linda and your team, thank you so much for your support. And my right-hand team put a ton of time in to pull together this event for a great cause that is Cyber Awareness Month. So I wish everybody who's with us, I wish you all a fantastic rest of your October and the rest of your Cyber Awareness Month. I wish you a great day. The recording from today will be available and made and distributed to you all. And thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you.
Thanks, you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Joseph.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Paul. Bye,
Thanks,
Lisa.
everyone.
Yeah.
See you later.